Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Recently I posted a video that I call Everyone Knows God Exists, Even Atheists. If you haven't watched that video, I want to encourage you to go and look at it. I'm going to put a link to it in the description of this video so you can watch it if you want, then come back and watch this. Now, there were some really interesting conversations in the comments because of this. It seemed to attract a lot of attention, primarily from atheists who didn't like it for obvious reasons, even though I had originally made the video just to help Christians understand this particular passage in Romans chapter 1 some more. But a lot of discussion happened because of this, but I wanted to just today pick up on one of the things. Maybe down the line we'll talk about some of the other rebuttals that atheists made in the comments, but this particular one really caught my attention because this one person, I assume it was a guy, he wrote that there's a contradiction, and I explained some things to him, and he was really nice, congenial about it all, and he said, maybe, okay, I didn't understand there's more context there, but he brought up this contradiction, a supposed contradiction between Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 8. Now, if there's a contradiction in the Bible, we have a big problem, right? Let me read to you Romans chapter 1. This is what the video was about last time. And by the way, if you were on that video thread, if you commented, welcome back. If you've seen this one now too, welcome. I'm glad you're watching the videos here. But let me start with Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 20. This was the discussion last time. It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Now, the point that I was making in that video was everyone can look around and see that there is at least some kind of a God. Maybe it won't necessarily draw you to the God of the Bible, but you can see there is some kind of a God out there, some kind of a supernatural being, and because of that, we're accountable to him. It doesn't say, by the way, notice that you can be saved through this revelation in nature. We call it natural revelation. It doesn't say that you can be saved, that you can know Jesus. It means that you're accountable because you know that there is someone to whom you're accountable by looking around at creation. But the rebuttal that I had was this particular person said that Romans 1 contradicts with a passage in 1 Corinthians. So here's the verses, and then we'll talk about, is this really a contradiction or not? 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 6 to 7 say this: "Yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge." So at first it seems like we have a contradiction here. Romans 1 says that everyone knows there's a God, and 1 Corinthians 8 says that there isn't. And the biggest problem is not just that there's a contradiction in the Bible here, but both passages were written by Paul. And if Paul can't agree with himself, we really have a problem, don't we? And so what I want to do is I want to look at this passage in 1 Corinthians and see if there is actually a contradiction between that and the passage over in Romans. So the first thing we have to do is look at context. And many times, if you're struggling with some biblical passages, you look at the context, right? Because you can't just pull any verse out by itself or even a series of verses. You have to look at it in its whole context. So the context in 1 Corinthians is that Paul is responding to a question that some people have about eating food that has been offered to idols. So I want to back up to the beginning of that chapter, 1 Corinthians 8, and look at verse 1. It says this: "Now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we have all knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him," or known by God. So what he's saying here is that we can know many, many things, right? But we can't let our knowledge overpower our love. There's some things that we know. These people, as we're going to see here in a little bit, they knew, some of these believers, they knew that idols were nothing. They knew that these false gods were nothing. They knew that offering meat to idols was worthless. It didn't change anything about the food because these idols weren't real. They knew that. But what Paul's going to tell them is sometimes you need to let your love for these other people overpower your knowledge. Hey, we can eat this food. Okay, maybe you can, but you're going to hurt somebody else. That's the context of this passage. So continuing now in verse 4. "Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in this world, and that there is no other God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, many people would call things gods. They even had emperor worship and all kinds of things. People came up with all these gods and lords. He says, yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. So there's not in everyone what knowledge? He's saying there's not in everyone that knowledge that there is one true God. We understand that. Not everybody understands that. And apparently there were some believers in Corinth that didn't completely grasp this. Sure, they put their faith in Jesus, but they were coming out of these pagan religions. And in this pagan religion, they had many, many gods. They were polytheistic. And when they came to Christ, they still had not matured yet to the point where they were able to strip away all of this old belief about paganism. So they were still having some questions. When people offered idols, are they actually offering to some kind of real God? And what's going on here? They hadn't completely grasped monotheism yet. They were believers, but they were immature. They were weak in the faith. They still needed to be taught. They had Jesus, and that's what gave them salvation, but they didn't completely understand everything yet about God. And so when they looked at meat offered to idols, they thought there was really something happening here. And for them to eat it, they would be violating their conscience. Okay, let's continue in verse 7 in the second part of the verse. He says, for some, with conscience of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. So these immature Christians who didn't yet understand that offering meat to an idol really was a worthless endeavor. There was nothing to it. If they ate this meat, they would think they were actually eating something that had been offered to a worthwhile eating. It would hurt their conscience because they knew they shouldn't be doing this as believers in God the Father and believers in Jesus Christ. Now, the mature ones, however, knew that it was no big deal. It was okay to eat meat. You could eat meat that had been in the temple to an idol, been offered to this idol. You could eat it because offering to this idol is like offering it to a wall or to a window. It didn't matter anything. For the mature believers, they knew it was nothing. They had this knowledge. But the immature believers were really struggling with this. Should I eat this meat that had been offered to idols or not? And if they ate it, they would be violating their conscience because they would think they're doing something wrong. So continue in verse 8 now. Paul says, but food does not commend us to God. For neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. It doesn't matter what you're eating here. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in the idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things that are offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat lest I make my brother stumble. So it wasn't anything about the food. He's saying, look, you have this knowledge, and this knowledge is that offering food to an idol does nothing. But you need to overcome that with love. Sure, you have the right to eat that meat. There's no problem. Go off and eat it in private. But if your immature brother, who is still struggling with, is there more than one God? And is paganism really something? They're struggling with that. They see you sitting in the idol's temple and they're eating the meat that's been offered to these idols. It's going to cause them a problem in their heart. And they're going to be struggling. What's going on? Is there something maybe to this paganism? Or okay, if they're eating it, I'll go ahead and eat it. And in doing so, they're going to feel like they're doing something wrong. And what you're doing as the stronger brother, enjoying your rights, is you are violating this particular weaker brother because he or she thinks it's not okay, but they're following you. And Paul is saying you need to act with love. Give up your rights for love in this particular situation here. So that's the context of 1 Corinthians 8. Now, what's so important here is that I see no contradiction between Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 8. And the reason is this. In Romans 1, Paul is saying, everybody knows by looking around at nature that there's some kind of a God. Now, understand, if you're an atheist or an agnostic and you're watching this, you're probably going to take issue with that, as many did on my other video. But I believe that's what Paul is saying here, that you know that there's someone out there, unless you're really shut off and say, I really don't want to believe that. Okay, but that's what it's saying here. I'm not pushing that point today. I'm just discussing the contradiction that it seems like there is between Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 8. So Romans 1 says that everybody knows that there's some kind of a God. right? 1 Corinthians 8 says the same thing. It doesn't say that people don't believe there is any kind of a God. It says that these people not just believe in one God, but they believe in many gods. So the people in Romans that is talking about, and the people in 1 Corinthians that is talking about there, they all believe that there is some kind of a God. There's nothing in either of these passages that say, well, some people don't understand that there's a God. So there is no contradiction here. These people all believe in some kind of a higher being. Just the ones in 1 Corinthians we're having a struggle with, is it just one final true God, or are there other gods there? So I see no contradiction there. Let me know what you think about this, if it makes any sense to you, if you have any other questions about this particular passage. Hopefully it will help you some as you try to understand if there's any contradictions in the Bible. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.